Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about MSU's upcoming visit to Big Ten country, Southern California, for two matchups against longtime conference rivals USC and UCLA. Thanks to the awesome support from all of you folks out there. After 2.5 years, Rod and I will actually meet for the first time, fly 2,100 miles to California, live together for 5 days. What could possibly go wrong, right? Before we begin, let me first thank the supporters of the show. You guys obviously make all this happen. Bill Church, Brian O'Donnell, Michael Bosdick, Chad Hickey, Mike Huntoon, Draymond Green supporters, Adam Walzak, Dan Rankin, James Benton, Jim L., David Brame, Paul Marsh, Scott Driscoll, Doug Robinson, Daniel Dranek, and Joe Hollis, and all the great Scott Skiles supporters, as well as Rich Wagenheim and Kenneth Cremette on Substack. If you want to join those awesome Spartan fans, head on over to tiffnots.com/support to get the necessary links. Rod and I will not only be somewhere in the stands, but we're also going to be at the pep rally on USC's campus Saturday morning at Town and Gown Ballroom. I have no idea where that is, except it's on campus. It's not too far from the Galen Center. That's at 11, I believe, 11 to 12:30, and the game is, I think, at 1:30. So feel free, if you've got tickets, I think you have to sign up online. Feel free to say hi. And continue to leave written comments on your podcast player. And
you can't actually, you can't do it online anymore. They've shut it down.
Oh, it's all sold out.
Yep.
Yeah. So I know they had about 300 capacity before, and it sounds like they're getting more. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see how many people are there. So continue to leave written comments on your podcast player and on YouTube. Those really help the other Spartans find. Like and subscribe. Honestly, I've been really impressed at our fairly new YouTube channel. It's been growing a ton, just even the last month. And we've almost hit my season goal, which was 500 subscribers. So I think we've added almost 100 in the last month. So I guess now our new goal is 1,000 before the the NCAA tournament. What do you say? Can we do it? All right. Well, let's talk about the Trojans. And this is, of course, the first time Michigan State's gone out to do this because Big Ten brand new teams out there. They go in the Galen Center. USC is 12-8, 4-5 this year. They've had some tough home court losses. They just recently lost to UCLA Monday night, their rival. They're 67th in Ken Palm, so not bad. They're 75th in the net. So they're definitely outside the tournament looking in, but certainly, like you mentioned before, if you squint hard enough, you could imagine a path for them to get back. And just like Michigan State, there are plenty of opportunities to move up and down in seeding and getting in or out of the tournament with games left.
That's the big thing. Look, they're a long shot. There's no other way to couch it. But as opposed to some other teams, there's a handful of teams that you could pretty much declare dead already. And yeah. I don't put USC in that category just yet because there's so many games remaining that you can see if they go on a run, maybe they could put themselves in position. I think about that Rutgers team from, God, it was 3 or 4 years ago where they looked DOA. And then they had so many games left that they managed to win the majority of, that they actually squeezed themselves in. So it is possible for USC. That said, they can't end up like USC is not a team that 10-10 is going to get it done.
Right, because their non-conference is bad.
Yep. They're going to have to go on a run.
Yeah.
But the opportunities are theoretically there for them.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it from Michigan State. Was Aaron Henry? I don't remember what season that was.
Sure.
But they had to beat. Well, they would have won like
2021.
Yeah, right. They had to really push it to get into the tournament and made it. So you're never totally dead. I mean, this team, Michigan State, obviously then was much closer than USC is this time. But there's still a lot of games left to play.
I use that. I'm looking at the standings right now, and USC and Ohio State are both 4-5.
Mm-hmm.
But the difference is Ohio State is significantly better in the metric system evaluation. So I have a feeling that a 10-10 Ohio State might not be totally dead, whereas a 10-10 USC is not getting in.
Yeah. Well,
USC, but a 12-8 USC, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and USC has a great road win at Illinois. That's worth some weight.
Absolutely.
They just have a couple home losses which have hurt them. And so, as always, you want to try and protect home court, steal a couple on the road, and then you're going to be above 500, and then you're probably getting some good quad 1, quad 2 victory opportunities. So obviously, Michigan State coming in is a quad 1 opportunity for USC. So that's a game that they're going to definitely want. So specifically about the Trojans, then offense, they're kind of 55th nationally, despite kind of not having a point guard, which I think we say about a lot of teams in the Big Ten.
Yep.
And they're very athletic. They're strong. They shoot twos pretty well at 62nd, and they get to the free throw line a lot at 55th. and they shoot 35% from three. So pretty good. They shoot 73.5% from the line, which is what, kind of like average or so,
Yeah,
probably.
little slightly below.
Yeah. And then offensive rebounding is really, really, really bad. So they're 277th offensive rebounding. They're 109th in the turnover. So they turn the ball over around a little bit. They don't get any extra. So basically, they're efficient when they get a shot up, but sometimes, but when they miss, they don't generally get second chances, and they don't generate. And then they tend to kick the ball around a little bit too, so
That's
it makes it
that's
harder.
that's all correct. I
Yeah.
think that it is remarkable to me that they're as high as 55th on offense, because I have seen USC play some games this year where I swear to God, I don't think I've ever seen an uglier looking offense in my life. And really, like, just totally discombobulated, disorganized. And it's because they don't have a point guard.
Right.
What has helped them and why they're rated with a decent offense, despite all that, is that they have enough guys who are good athletes and who have enough of a skill set that they can still find ways to make things happen despite not having anybody who really constitutes being a true floor leader. And that's what's gotten them off the hook.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And they do have enough guys like that. The 3-point shooting, it would not be something I would have predicted for this team, but they've actually shot threes reasonably well. That's helped
Hmm.
them. So that's what I mean. They've got guys that, despite oftentimes incoherent looking offense, can just go out and make a play. Like we used to talk last year about Michigan State with Tyson Walker, right?
Yeah.
They always had that option available to them. If everything else broke down, you get the ball to Tyson with about 7 seconds left on the shot clock and let him just go try and make a play. Well, UCLA's got a lot of guys like that.
Yeah. So defensively, it's even worse. It's worse than their offense. They're 94th overall, so that's almost outside the top 100, obviously, which is really bad for Big Ten. Part of it is because they are one of the worst free throw percentage defenses in the country. I think they're what, 200. They're one of the
Yeah,
15,
it's
15 worst. That means
really,
it's bad luck.
really bad luck.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but part of the problem is that they're fouling a lot. So they're
Yep.
220th and putting opponents on the line. So it's entirely possible they're putting people who are really good at shooting free throws on the line a lot. And
And,
so
and it also means that any complaints about bad luck kind of go out the window.
when you're putting them on the line, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
You're getting what you deserve.
They do not have a good 2-point defense. They're 271st in that. They defensive rebound pretty well at 62nd. And from a pace standpoint, they're certainly not Minnesota, but they're not Michigan State. They're 151st overall in tempo, 174th in length, average length of possession. And anyway, so I guess the other news is Terrence Williams, former Michigan transfer. Because as we talked about for preseason, truly the entire team is new, right? I think maybe they one player who's left over,
Who's not really
like a
in the
walk on or
rotation.
something like
No,
that.
he's
Yeah.
he's a scholarship player, but he's not really in the rotation.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so Terrence Williams is out. He was averaging 10.5 points and 4.5 rebounds a game. So anyway, he's out, and so it shortens their bench a little bit.
Yeah, because he started. I think he played in 7 games. I believe he started 6 of them. So it's had the effect of shortening what was already not a super deep rotation.
Right.
Going back to their defense, um, there's some bad signs when you can't stop opponent twos and you can't stop fouling people.
Yeah.
That's how you end up with a defense that's almost outside of the top 100, right?
Right.
Like, they've been okay limiting threes, but when you struggle doing those two things, that's a problem. The one thing they do reasonably well, as you pointed out, is they do end possessions okay. They're number 62 in defensive rebounding.
Right.
Now, that's a number that I would still like to think Michigan State can get some things done with its own offensive rebounding, but they're significantly better there than on the offensive end.
Mm-hmm.
So USC is, to me, kind of the median of what you would expect when you're overhauling an entire roster. And
Mm-hmm.
Eric Musselman has kind of lived in this environment. He was at Nevada prior to the portal, but they were still a transfer heavy team. And then his tenure at Arkansas, which was during the portal period, they were a transfer heavy team.
Yeah.
And he's had some inconsistencies. He's had some very good teams. His last team at Arkansas last year was anything but good. And that was part of the reason he took the USC job, was that, and that was a weird deal, that whole thing. I won't go into the
Yeah, we don't need to get
details,
details.
but
Just it was strange.
there was a
Strange
lot
internal
of
dynamic problems.
strange, exactly. And so I think the feeling was, it was funny because he'd had good seasons up till that point, but it felt like he was getting out ahead of the posse.
Hmm.
Andy Enfield left USC to take the SMU job, getting out ahead of the posse. And then Musselman takes this job basically for the same reason. It's an interesting move because USC basketball historically has not mattered. Now that doesn't mean that they never have good teams. Michigan State's played them twice in the last 20 years in the NCAA tournament.
Right.
So, including as recently as 2 years ago. So they've had good teams. They've had good players. They got a bunch of guys from that program in the NBA right now. But
Hmm.
in terms of what the program actually means within the USC athletic department and within the Los Angeles sporting community as a whole, it's never mattered.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting choice to me to watch Musselman, who even with what happened last year at Arkansas, still is a guy I would have thought had options. Now, the flip side of this is, you can do it in with relatively less pressure on you at
Right.
USC. The only sport they really care about is football. And so you're not going to face a lot of heat. And it gives you time to build your thing. And you do have the resources of now a Big Ten program and the revenue that comes with that. So that's all good. That might be fine. But Musselman never struck me as that kind of guy. He strikes me as a bit of an ego guy. And I'm not even saying that at least 100% pejoratively.
Right.
Um, there are some guys that are wired to want to do it that way. And there are other guys that, they want to be the main attraction.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to envision Rick Pitino at a football first school, for
Lane Kiffin
example.
with the opposite in football, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's just certain guys that you don't think of that way. Calipari, another one,
Hmm.
and in fact, he had conflicts around that when he was at Kentucky toward
Right.
the end of his tenure. So I assumed Musselman, he always struck me as that kind of guy, but he is at the epitome of a football first school. I mean, just like it's only marginally better than, say, a Penn State in that way. And I wouldn't say it's as good as even a Michigan or Ohio State. So
Right.
I don't know. The whole thing strikes me as a little strange, but I know this. I know Eric Musselman has proven that he's a capable coach, and it's not going to surprise me if he at least occasionally has teams that can fight to be in the upper tier of this conference. As I say, at least on occasion. I don't think this year is going to end up as one of those. They're 4-5 right now. I don't love the odds for them to go on the kind of streak that we mentioned they would need
Yeah.
to get into the tournament. And it's because, in part, he's had to overhaul the entire roster. He doesn't have a point guard, and he also really doesn't have a legitimate center. That's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to win that way. So on the one hand, I'm inclined to give him a little bit of credit for doing what he's managed to do with this roster. On the other hand, he put it together.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
He couldn't find a center or a point guard in the portal. That's strange.
Yeah. There are all kinds of fives in the portals, system,
Well,
right?
but different
I'm
than what
sure.
he's got.
Yeah.
At least somebody physically. He's got one 6'10" kid who starts but only plays 15 minutes a game. We'll talk about in a minute. Josh Cohen. That's it. You can't even find a body. I mean, he's not. This isn't Tom Izzo making those decisions. It's Eric Musselman. He's
Right.
fine with bringing in new guys every year. So
Yeah.
it's just very strange how he put this team together. But then I consider about what they actually are, and I think, well, given all that, not terrible. They've had some highs and lows. They got flat handled at home by Michigan. Then they
Yeah.
go to Champaign and they beat Illinois by 10. I mean, they've been up and down, but I will say I think they've been better lately since Big Ten play started back up. I think USC's been a much better team than they were before that.
Well, it'll be interesting going to the Galen Center because, as you mentioned, I think capacity is like 10,200 or something like that. But they're averaging, I think, it was 3,000 fans a game, or a little over
Yeah,
like
yeah.
3,500. It'll be interesting to see the contingent of Michigan State fans, but also if there'll be more people show up for this game. But I mean, that is the worst attendance in the Big Ten. Which, as much as we rag on Penn State, this is much worse. I think, and I think even has a lower attendance. I think even UCLA is less
Well,
than
I
Penn
will
State.
I will tell you that I've been reading some USC forums in the last couple of days, message boards, and I haven't verified whether it's accurate or not. But one of the claims I saw made is that when Andy Enfield, like 2 years ago, when he kind of had it going a little bit, that
Hmm.
there was more enthusiasm, but that last year just kind of killed it,
Yeah,
and they haven't recovered this season, and that the people were lamenting this. Posters were lamenting it. They said it's a shame because they said, look, this team competes, they play hard. It's the kind of thing that should get people excited, but it just hasn't happened. And they say student support is way down. I mean, honestly, I don't even know that USC has a student section. None of those Pac-12 schools really have a presence. Like, when you're watching a game at Mackey about the paint crew, about the Izzone, about the Orange Crush, or whatever the hell they call them at Illinois now.
yeah.
That stuff is obvious, right? But you just don't. It doesn't come across. And all four of those venues. I mean, I'm even going to throw UCLA in there. It's just it's a different thing, man. Even when you're watching the games on TV, and we're going to be able to experience it firsthand. And I've got
Right.
a feeling both those buildings are going to be much liver than they normally are because of the presence of Michigan State people. But you watch those games on TV and you just feel it. Like
Oh yeah.
it
It's like,
makes it makes Iowa look like the Cameron Crazies,
yeah.
you know?
Well, maybe not this year, but certainly, I
Well,
was
no, I mean this year. That's what I'm
okay.
saying.
All right. Well,
It's
we'll see.
bad.
Yeah.
It's bad. Well, we're not going to see because we're going to have a bunch. There's going to be a
Well, that's
bunch of
true.
Michigan State people
Yeah.
there,
Right.
and it's going to be different. We have to be cognizant of that. But it's. We talked about this in the summer, man. It's a different thing there, and if you haven't experienced West Coast sporting culture, you have to recalibrate your expectations. I was having another discussion about this today. Los Angeles and San Francisco are well, they're even a little different. San Francisco is a total pro town. It
Yeah.
is the Niners far and away above everything else. Then the Giants are pretty steady, good crowd for that. And then everything else, the pro sports is dependent upon winning, and sometimes not even that. Like the Warriors are great now, they weren't always that way in terms
Right.
of attendance.
Sure.
Sharks, whatever. Um, and Cal and Stanford could be good, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
LA is in some ways even worse. You've got LA, you got the Dodgers and the Lakers that everybody loves. Football, you see at SoFi when the
Yeah. There's
Rams and
nobody
the
there.
Chargers, no, there are people there, the opposing team's fans,
Well, yes. I
transplants.
mean, right.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
who's there.
Yeah.
It's not a good pro football town. Hockey is, the Clippers, come on. And then the colleges, the one sport that seems to get it done attendance wise there among college sports, and this is true for the whole state, is USC football when they're good.
Yeah.
That will draw a crowd. Other than that, and I'm even including UCLA basketball in this, unfortunately, it's just not what you're used to as a Big Ten fan. It makes places like Chrysler look great by comparison, and I mean that. Like that's sad, but it's true. So hopefully, through their membership in the Big Ten, they're going to start cultivating more of that than they have historically. But that's going to be a process. That's not going to happen easily.
Well, you wonder because you look at Northwestern as a good example in the sense that they have a very small alumni base. They're pretty small school compared to the other Big Ten schools, right? And for forever, it was a really great home away from home for a lot of programs
Yeah,
in Big Ten. It is not that way anymore. And Northwestern sort of turned around and focused on that a little bit. You wonder if these schools, once they see, they see your, arena getting invaded all the time, at some point you just say, we got to put a stop to this and find some way
Rutgers.
to, yeah,
Rutgers is
right.
another
Rutgers is a great
example of
example.
this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cause that was a cavern before too, before they really started getting into it. So yeah,
Yep.
you can change. I mean, culture changes and you've
It
seen that
it does.
Nebraska too. I'm sure Nebraska Big 12, it
Yep.
was nothing. And once again, the Big 10, it was to change. I think that's the case. I guess I don't remember watching much
I think
Nebraska
it's got.
basketball.
I think it's gotten stronger. Um, but yeah, that's what the Big Ten will be hoping for. But I think you've seen, if you're paying attention, if you're staying up late and watching any of these games from out there, you do see it.
Yeah.
Like
No,
like the
no
the
question.
bet the best of those four is probably Oregon, and by Big Ten standards, it's not much, and that's the best.
You know what's weird talking about, you just mentioned Pink Crew. My son could only get one ticket. Now he's a freshman, but it sounded like most students only got one or two tickets for the entire season. Is that
Yeah,
crazy? I mean, I would think
that's
that I would that's not the case at Izzone. You see the same kids there every game. They do get they get half a season package or whatever. But to just get like one game, it just
yeah,
seems,
that's a strange way of going about it. I mean, I
I
have
don't
a
know. I
memory
just assumed it's the same people in the Pink Crew every year, every
from
game.
when I was a student at Michigan State. Basketball tickets were not in massive demand yet,
Right.
but hockey was,
Right.
and
Hmm.
you had to enter a lottery that was weighted by your class year. So if you were a senior, you had much better odds than a freshman would
Sure.
at getting tickets, and that's how it operated. So I would assume maybe there's something similar going on at Purdue.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, how many student tickets are there for hockey? Probably 500 or
Mm,
something like that.
Much fewer, yeah.
Yeah, and for basketball, they're probably maybe the zone is what, a couple, maybe like a 1,500. I'm guessing maybe, because they definitely put them in the upper deck too later in the year sometimes. So yeah, I'd imagine. So if you got, if that is your main attraction, like at Purdue, that's, you probably just don't, you have, if you want everybody to have the experience, they're just gonna have to go once or twice.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I think that's probably their rationale, which isn't all bad, but
yeah, there's no
um,
good answer sometimes in that
yeah,
case.
yep,
All right, well, let's talk about the players to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the brothers that just do gutters. So it's warm up a little bit. The ice is melting. The snow is melting. Make sure those gutters are operating properly in your house or your business. So if you have problems or concerned, contact the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. They're both on the east and the west side of the state. They only do gutters, so they're really good at that one thing. They'll get up on the ladder so you don't have to. They can fix your downspouts. They can fix the run of gutters, even if you have one section that's broken or the whole section you didn't replaced, just repaired, cleaned out. You can put some leaf guards on top of them, put some heaters on so it doesn't have ice buildup. Whatever you need done, those guys can do it, and they do fantastic work. Great pricing, and as a listener to the show, you get 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to get your estimate at our support page at tffinots.com/support. All right. So we're going to go through the lineup for USC. This is not going to be a very tricky one as far as used to be kept in the gutter, but we'll start with Desmond Claude, 6'6" junior transfer from Xavier. He's the best player. He leads them with scoring at 16.7 points a game, shooting 50, 33, and 76. Doesn't take a lot of threes, though. He almost pulls down 4 rebounds a game, has about 4 assists per game, but also does average 3 turnovers a game. So he's a little bit rough with that. And he gets about 6 free throw attempts a game as well.
yeah. He's the guy who is by far their biggest, most consistent offensive weapon. He was a good player at Xavier, but he's really blossomed this year. I'd love to see him if he could play his real position, which is not point guard, but they don't have a choice. So
Yeah.
they run a lot of offense through him. And he's what I would call a dynamic player as opposed to an efficient one.
Hmm.
He'll make plays, 4 assists per game, not terrible, but he'll also make a lot of mistakes. So that's the downside for USC's offense in that regard. But he's a downhill player. As you mentioned, I think he's only taken 33 triples on the year, so it's about 1.5 attempts per game.
Right.
And he's okay, but not great there. The name of his game is getting downhill. And at 6'6", and he's relatively athletic, he can make things happen that way. He draws a lot of fouls, and he shoots free throws reasonably well. So those are all positives. And he's a good finisher. You know, 50% from the floor as a guard. Hey, that's
Yeah.
that you're able to convert plays. So he's a guy that Michigan State's going to have to load up with. And as we've seen in some other games this year, USC size. This is a small team if you judge them by the upper limits of their roster, like how many true bigs they might have, but they've got good positional size, like on the perimeter.
Hmm.
They've got a bunch of guys that are, for Michigan State, a team that's a little smaller there. It, at least on the surface, creates an interesting dynamic. It's going to be interesting to me to see how they choose to guard Claude initially, who gets the first assignment. I will not be surprised to see it be Jeremy Fierce, despite the size disadvantage.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Well,
Well,
and part of why I'm saying that is, okay, Claude is I don't necessarily expect to see him try to post up, but he's not much of a perimeter threat. So
oh, sure.
Jeremy, on the one hand, you want Jeremy to get into him because he's loose with the ball, but on the other, you could sag and kind of dare him to shoot a little
Hmm.
bit. So I might be wrong about that. We'll just have to see how MSU decides to guard them, but it'll be interesting to see who ends up with the first assignment. We know it's going to be a variety of guys, no matter what happens.
Yeah, with lots of switching and stuff like that. Yeah,
That
and you,
and just the guys coming in and out. It's
yes, the junk drawer for Izzo. Yeah,
yeah.
all kinds of different people. Yeah, the one thing I would say is Izzo does not usually, for somebody shooting plus 30%, they don't sag a whole lot. But you're right, they may not just be quite in him because they're more worried about the drive than they are the outside shot. And just for those who are, the only game I watched of USC is when they play Illinois, and just Desmond Claude just destroyed the
Yeah, I
lineman. I mean,
think
I
he
don't
was
know.
30, 31 or something in that
Yeah,
game. Yeah,
he
he was
just was
big.
driving, and if he didn't get fouled, he's scoring or both. I
Yeah,
mean, he
that's
was unstoppable.
that's his game. That's their game.
Yeah.
Get downhill. I mean, this is something, and we're going to get into it when we talk about the keys. But Musselman coming out of that tough loss to UCLA the other night was bitching about how his team isn't getting rewarded with foul calls. Now they shot 20 free throws, so it wasn't nothing, but that's an average number. He's used to having teams that are at the top of I think 11 of the previous 12 years, his teams have been in the top 30 in free
Hmm.
throw attempts as a percentage of field goal attempts, foul rate. So he's claiming they're not getting rewarded for it in the Big Ten the way his teams typically have been. But uh, that's strategically, that's what they want to do. And that's what they do. They shoot threes decently, but they don't take a ton of them. They only take, I don't know, it's less than 30% of their field goal attempts are from three, I think, or right around that mark. So not wildly more than, say, MSU does.
Yeah.
But it's a downhill oriented team. And he's the best at that.
Right. Well, and I know Michigan State is the least in utilization of the three for any team in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
All right. So next would be Wesley Yates, 6'4" freshman, transferred in from Washington. Misses freshman year up in Washington with an injury. He's scoring 11.4 points a game on 48, 36, and 77. So definitely an outside shooter. And he's been averaging a little bit more. So it's about 16 and a half points over the last 5 games.
He's a good player. That was a good in the portal. That was a good acquisition, which is funny. We're using that kind of terminology, but it's true. Well, I'll put it this way: Washington could sure use him. Um, he's been really good, and he's been good. They've had a couple guys, and he's one of them who have been better lately. Like you can see, this is his first year playing, so it's an adjustment. He's essentially a new guy, a similar position to Jeremy Fears, and you can just see the growth happening. I've been really impressed by him. He's another guy, good size at 6'4". That's not nothing.
Yeah.
Um, and he's athletic. He could score getting to the rim, and he's also been a reasonably solid 3-point shooter. So he's another guy Michigan State's going to really have to worry about.
So another transfer for the team is Chibuzo Agbo. He came in from Boise State, played a couple years at Texas Tech. He's 6'7", averages 11.6 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, and he shoots 39, 37, and 87, with most of his shots coming from outside.
He is their designated 3-point shooter. As we said, this is a team that shoots them relatively well. They don't take a lot. He's the exception. He's the guy that you've really got to worry about taking threes and making them. You also see part of the problem here, and fortunately, his offensive profile maybe mitigates at least some of the concern, because at least with Michigan State's starting lineup, we know they've got adjustments they can make in the rotation to deal with this, but you see the problem. 6'6", 6'7", 6'4". Michigan State goes 6'1", and that's probably a little generous. 6'2", 6'3". The one thing that helps is this kid is mostly a perimeter player. So I don't know that at least offensively his 6'7" is really going to play
Right.
in ways that would concern you. So they may be able to get away with it. But Yeah, he's having a really good year, and it's primarily as a shooter.
Then we have St. Thomas, 6'7", 220-pound senior transfer from Northern Colorado. I was so sure I was going to say St. Thomas Aquinas. Started his career at Loyola Chicago. He's been averaging 11.1 points a game, 6.1 rebounds a game to lead the team, shooting 47, 34, and 64. And is a good assist guy. He's got 83 assists, almost as many as Claude.
And with far fewer turnovers.
Right.
So he's almost a point forward for them. He's been another guy that, he's coming off a good year at Northern Colorado, which, by the way, is the same school that the year before Dalton Connect had been at, and then transferred to Tennessee and made himself into a first-round draft pick. I don't know that St. Thomas has done quite that job, but he's been very good and very important for a USC team that just doesn't have any size. He's been important. There was an interesting article, and I don't want to go too far because it's one side of an equation, but there was discussion about some mental health issues he had suffered when he was at Loyola, and the way that Drew Valentine and his staff handled it was not flattering. Now, again, it was a one-sided piece, so I'm not taking that as gospel, but I will say this, for the kids' sake, it's really good that it's developed the way that it has, and he's apparently enjoying himself playing at USC, and he's playing very well.
Well, it's quite a change from Northern Colorado or Chicago to Los Angeles. That's from a weather standpoint, it's certainly an improvement. Finally, we have Josh Cohen, 6'10", 220-pound senior. So he's a little bit lanky guy. He originally was at UMass. He's averaging 7.4 points a game, 2.4 rebounds a game, shooting 62, 17, and 76. And plays about, like as you mentioned before, plays about 15 minutes a game.
Yeah, he's the only quasi center sized guy, but he doesn't really have a center's game. I mean, he's not a 3-point shooter, certainly. You look at those numbers.
17%, yeah.
But he still strikes you as more of a finesse center. And so it's going to be interesting because USC is going to go small a lot. And how does Michigan State choose to deal with that? Does that mean that you stay big and you try to exploit that lack of size? That's possible. We've seen MSU do that with this group at times. Or do you decide that you need to match up with them? And so we see a lot more of Carr and Fiddler at the 4, and maybe more of Jackson and Book at the 5 than we normally would. We'll see.
Yeah, definitely. And it certainly seems like Fiddler feels most comfortable playing the 4, which is where he played previously in Omaha, I guess. And yeah, it'd be nice. I'm sure it'd be nice for him. He'd be much more comfortable in that position. So we probably don't need to go to reserves as far as a player to keep in the gutter. I imagine that's Desmond Claude.
It is. It is Desmond Claude. Full stop. He's their best player. I mean, simple as that.
Hands down. So they're just moving on briefly. There's a couple reserves worth mentioning. The first is Rashawn Agee, 6'8", 225-pound senior transfer from Bowling Green. He's averaging 7 points a game and 3.5 rebounds a game in about 16 minutes. He shoots 56, 39, and 78.
Yeah, but notice he's another guy, or like Yates. Over the last 5 games, he's averaging 14.4 points a game, or more than double his seasonal average. So it's fair to say he's coming on.
Right.
He creates a problem, potentially. It gets at what I was just talking about, because AG frequently plays the 5. But he's a guy who can do a lot of damage on the perimeter. And he's reasonably athletic. He's only 6'8". So how do you match up with him? You can do certain things, like you're comfortable with Carson Cooper playing minutes against a guy like that. And you might even get some easy baskets around the rim because of the size difference. And yet, defensively, Carson has the footwork and the athleticism to be able to stay with a guy like that. So you could play him. Can you play Zapala? I don't know. Do you only play Zapala when Cohen's out there? Maybe. Cohen only played 8 minutes their last game against UCLA, which is a team that can go small or can go really, really big. They have a 7'3" center we'll be talking about when we do the UCLA, who did a lot of damage in that game. But it's going to be fascinating to me to see how, and UCLA played him a lot, and he's less mobile than anybody Michigan State has. So does MSU opt to go that route? It remains to be seen. But AG at least presents the questions. because
Yeah, and I
he's playing better now, and I think he's going to play a lot in this game.
yeah, I feel one of the interesting things about Michigan State this year, and this may not at all be true, but I certainly get the impression that they have ideas of what they're going want to do, but they have the ability with just the versatility in the lineup that they can just sort of find out, okay, this is what's going to work and this is what's not working today for whatever reason. Maybe the players are playing better, but that they may say, oh, the bigs are it's working. Let's just go with that. Or they say, I guess we got to play small. We're more effective that way. But they kind of just feel teams out the first bit of the game to find out what's operationally what's going to give them the best results.
I don't think there's any question about that. And you see it in terms of the minutes allocations,
Right.
right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It changed game to game. You just don't,
It's weird.
certain guys you can feel reasonable. You can probably be reasonably confident in the minutes that those four guards are going to play.
Right.
It might vary a little bit from guy to guy
Yeah.
and game to game, but they're all going to kind of be in a window.
Yeah. 50 to
And
25 or something.
yeah, well, I would even say tighter than that.
Yeah. Maybe
Maybe
18.
more
Yeah.
like 18 to 25, something like
Yeah.
that.
Sure.
But beyond that, hey, maybe Cohen Carr is starting to enter into that category where it's more predictable. But on the other hand, you would have said Jackson Kohler was in that category. And until lately, he had been for a long stretch. But even now with him, kind of depends on the game. There are some
Yeah.
situations, as we saw in the Rutgers game, right, where he just didn't play very much
Mhm.
relative to the minutes he'd been getting before that. So, yeah, I think they're absolutely doing that.
Yeah, and certainly like a guy like Carr or not Carr, but Jackson definitely depends on what the team wants to do at certain points of the game. If they're like, okay, it's time to go small for a little bit, and then he's just out, and so it's because they can just play such a huge variety of combinations of players. Moving on to Clark Slatert, 6'1" senior transfer from Penn. He's averaging 2.3 points a game on 29, 19, and 67. So not much of a shooting
Yeah,
presence.
and he's not playing a ton, but he did play quite a few minutes against UCLA. I think he's averaging about 8 minutes a game. It's been a failure. I mean,
Yeah.
let's call spade a spade. He was brought in to provide shooting, and he's shooting what he's shooting.
Yeah.
So, but you might see him. Look, they gotta play somebody because I don't think they get away with playing 6 or 7 guys
Well, and they don't have
against
Terrence
Michigan
Shannon,
State.
right? He's injured, so that
Terrence,
makes
yeah,
Terrence. Yes. Yeah.
they don't have him, and that has cut into their depth even further. Yeah, so I don't know they got much of a choice.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, we know one thing that Michigan State's guards do is they take their toll on you physically.
Yeah.
They will get after you, and because of the way they guard you and the way they force you to guard them, you're probably going to have a hard time if you're not going to the bench at least occasionally.
Yeah, and they definitely, especially on defense too, they really can harass you. I think a lot. Saw that with the Minnesota game for sure. Finally, is Kevin Patton, 6'8", 200-pound senior sophomore transfer from San Diego, averaging 3.3 points a game in only 9 minutes, shooting 56, 46, and 53, obviously in very limited volume.
Yeah, so an encouraging start. I honestly don't know why he's not playing a little bit more. There must be some other issues because the shooting numbers are really good. But his minutes have been very much going up and down lately. Like he'll have a game where he might play 12, another game. I think he only played 1 minute against UCLA. So you see some variance there. But again, playing Michigan State is unlike playing most other teams in the Big Ten. We talked about this before the Minnesota game, and sure enough, Minnesota ended up playing a couple guys much more than they have been lately.
Yeah.
Why did they do that? It wasn't because those guys were going great. Neither one of them scored,
Yeah.
but they had no choice.
Hmm.
They had to, because Michigan State's depth forces you to at least try, and not just their depth and the way they play, the way they use that freshness, that energy level to force you to expend a bunch of energy. And then you're in a position where you have to find fresh legs. And it's hard. It's hard
Yeah.
for a roster like USC to keep up with that.
All right. So, who cleans the glass best? Brought to you by Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you're around the Grand Rapids area, and that's a very large area, that's Grand Rapids and the greater, what's it called, the greater Grand Rapids area, it includes it goes all the way out to Lansing, even down to Kalamazoo, out to Lakeshore. So contact the Squeegee Squad if you want some windows cleaned. It doesn't have to be just your home. It could be your business. It can be you can maybe have to rent some rental properties. Maybe you've got a big high rise. They can do anything. They've even cleaned the state capitol's windows, so they can take on any job, large or small, interior, exterior. They can take care of the screens, and of course during the winter months they're doing some painting. So if you need to paint a room or two painted, you can contact the Squeegee Squad. The great thing about it as a listener of the show, you get 15% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. And guess how you find it? At the support page at the Final Four is not the schedule.com/support. There you can find a way to get a hold of Troy and his team, and you can get their great professionals to come out and take care of whatever it is you need done. They do, again, fantastic work. And we only have people here who do good work, who I'd highly recommend to people, even if I didn't have a show. So they're definitely one of those. And they sponsor a player who, from Michigan State, who cleans the glass best. But now, of course, the snake draft, which has a little bit more integrity than it did before. It's now 9-7. I finally broke your 5-0 run. And I don't know, we'll start. You get to pick first. This is actually a game I'm actually much happier being the second pick than the first, to be honest.
Yeah, it does create some issues. You wonder how many minutes Jackson might or might not get, but I'm going to go with Jackson because
Yeah.
I could see him also maybe getting some 5 minutes in this game potentially. So I think he's going to end up with more or less his normal kind of playing time, no matter how it cuts.
And you think you're getting at least 5 with him, right? I mean, you have a good foundation for your
You
rebounding
would
numbers
think.
with
You would
Kohler. I
think.
mean,
Yeah.
there aren't many games where he's getting pulled down less than that, maybe
Right.
4 sometimes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I mean, I think the hot hand right now has got to be Cooper, and so I'm just going to stick with him. And I do think he'll play quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Just because although he's got the size, they may not need that much size. The mobility is good, and defensively he was fantastic. And so if he can maintain that, won't know until he plays. That feels like it's like that with a lot of these players to the game. And so if he doesn't play great, they have a couple good 1 or 2 rounds, then you may not see much in the second half. And so that's always the risk for any of these folks. And then I'm just going with Carr. I think this is a game that you're going to see a lot of him playing, just because there are a lot of matchups that I think you're going to want his size and athletic ability to stop driving. And I just think he's a guy who's going to see a lot of minutes, and I think he's going to be able to be pretty effective. So Cooper and Carr for me.
Okay. Tough one because
this does not seem like a Zapala game to me, but I don't know what you think.
It doesn't, but I could also see a burst from him the way we saw at the beginning of the Minnesota game.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Zapala. I'm going to play the odds on that front and figure that he's going to have enough moments he's out there where he just kind of dominates due to his size, and that's enough to get me over the line. But we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so then we come to the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. If you need something with a Spartan apparel, go to Nudge Printing. They have a huge selection, super comfortable stuff. It's all great high quality logos, screen printed material, so it sustains, washes really well. You can get all sorts of different things, whether it's a t-shirt, a hoodie, a quarter zip, a jacket, a hat. They have fat heads you can put on your wall or on your cornhole, on your computer. I've got some, which you can't see because of the backup side of my computer here. They've got all kinds of things, and it's great pricing. It's all done in the state of Michigan and Portland, Michigan, so it's all homegrown and by a couple Spartan grads. So you can get not only Michigan State stuff, but of course you can get from all the other different schools in Michigan outside of the University of Michigan. You just have to go somewhere else for that kind of garbage. You can also get stuff from other schools in this country, which are just kind of random, like Texas State and Iowa. So if you want to get that, you also get 20% off as a listener of the show if you type in Final Four, just as one word at checkout. So head on over there now. You won't regret it. Okay, so the first key, this is the first time we've ever had this key to the game. Time zone. Obviously, moving out to the Pacific time zone, 3-hour difference. So not only do you and I have to recover, but we don't have to play basketball right afterwards.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. It is the first time that Michigan State has dealt with this. That they've been outside. And that they've been outside of the Eastern or Central time zone since Maui. So it's been a while. It's a 1:30 tip local time, so MSU's got to adjust to that. But hopefully, it's not a big negative. And you're not going to Europe or Asia.
That's like a 5 o'clock tip during the day. I mean,
it's not horrible. But here's the thing: USC is 1-2 so far at home versus non-West Coast teams. And if you looked at the other 3 schools, which I did, They are a combined 4-5 in those kind of games. The only one of the four West Coast schools that has a winning record at home against non-West Coast schools in the league is UCLA. They're 2-1. Their loss came to Michigan, but they won the
Yeah.
other two games. So on balance, it's hard to say that this has been that travel to the West Coast has been a major negative factor. Now, what I haven't done is I haven't done any kind of regression analysis, nor am I going to control for who's playing who and where, all of
Yeah.
that stuff. It's just the raw data, but I think the raw data at least suggests to us it's enough to be persuasive to me to suggest, well, this isn't an automatic. It's not like, for years and years and years in sports like the NBA and the NHL, when you would see a team go on a West Coast swing, it would always be, hey, if we could split, that would be great.
Right.
And it was just considered to be tough because of the travel requirements. But part of that is that in those sports, frequently you might be playing on back-to-backs. So the second game of a back-to-back could be really difficult to deal with, right? Because you're adding to the normal pressures that brings to bear the impact of the travel and a time zone difference and all of that. This is a little different. There's going to be 2 days between these two games. So it's a little accelerated, but it's not a disaster. And the fact that they're able to stay in the same city is even though they are going to switch hotels, very helpful. But I think the raw numbers tell us this is not something that should automatically be taken as a gargantuan task in at least for travel purposes.
Now you do far more traveling than I do, especially outside the time zone. It is always better traveling west than east, right? It always seems like it's easy to adjust staying up a little bit later as opposed to like moving where you're losing hours.
Generally speaking, that's the conventional wisdom. Yes. And I can tell you in my own experience, I've never had a problem going to the West Coast. I have had problems, say, going to Europe.
Sure. Yeah.
So
And that's more than just
yes.
language issues, right? Yeah. So
Yeah. So I would tend to agree with the conventional wisdom, at least in terms of my own experience. Yeah.
all right. So the second key to the game is the foul line. Obviously, Michigan State does really well getting there, and then also hitting when they get there. USC tends to foul a lot, so this is a place where you hope Michigan State have quite an advantage. And but also USC gets to the foul line a decent amount too.
They do, but they're not quite as good converting them. They're okay. So there's a gap there. The other thing is, although Michigan State has gone backward a little bit of late in terms of their defensive foul rate, they've been fouling more, putting opponents on the line more than they were earlier in the year. They're still decent. They're in the upper half nationally. That's significantly better than USC. And so what I'm hoping for is that Michigan State's better shooting, their better percentage, and the fact that they don't foul as much as USC does is enough to carve out a distinct advantage here. What I don't know is what, if any, effect is there of Musselman crying and having, for whatever it's worth, in a game in Los Angeles, having what in theory should be a home court whistle. That's the great unknown.
Do you think he and Brad Underwood have a secret handshake and they in some secret club about?
I don't know. I mean, look, I will say this in defense of Musselman, his teams do play downhill. I mean, that's their deal.
Yeah.
So are they maybe not getting the benefit of calls that he's historically been used to his teams getting? Maybe, but that could be for a variety of reasons. These guys might not be quite as good at drawing contact as other teams he's had. That's one reason. I will say this: I watched several USC games, but I watched that most recent game, and against UCLA, and I didn't feel there was anything crazy going on. But who knows? What I'm hopeful for is that his jawboning isn't going to have an impact.
Do you if you watch more games than I have out there, do you see similar refs that we see in the games like in the Midwest, or does it seem like a different reffing crew in general than the ones we see?
Sometimes you do. It depends. No, a lot of these guys are just fine traveling, whatever they got to travel to work 6 nights a week and get the paycheck. Yeah, it's no, it's roughly similar.
It's all about the bank. All right. Third key to the game is a transition. Obviously, Michigan State tries to get some stuff going there. And this is one where, if especially if Michigan State gets some nice clean defensive rebounds, which hopefully they do, because USC is not a good defense or offensive rebounding team. Although we have said that before, but if they do that, it's amazing how much they can get out in transition this year and how much better
Yeah.
they are in getting and running.
Here's the thing. Here's the problem for USC. Minnesota is a team that is very familiar with what Michigan State wants to do. Their coaching staff's very familiar with it. Enough of their players are familiar with it that it was part of their game plan. And I think they actually executed it pretty well
Yep,
last
I
night.
agree.
And Michigan State still got 17 fast break points.
Yeah,
Eric Musselman, to my knowledge, and I'm pretty sure I got this right, has never coached against Michigan State. He hadn't spent that much. You think of him as a college coach, but I think this is only his 10th year as a college head coach. He spent a lot of time in the NBA. So he's never, to my knowledge, he's never matched up with a Tom Izzo team. So he's never seen it. He's an aware guy. Of course, he's going to know that's their strength and he's going to be attempting to prepare them for it. But as we say often, until you face it, until you're dealing with it physically in front of you, I think it's hard to appreciate just what it means to deal with Michigan State's transition game. Add in the fact that this is by and large, and we see this, you could see this by watching them, the eye test. You could see it by looking at what the metrics tell you. This is kind of an undisciplined defensive team in a lot of ways. And I think that's got the potential to add up to a bad night for USC in terms of what they give up on the break. And we'll see. Sometimes teams surprise you. A team that you have these doubts about just does a really good job getting back. And we can say USC does not emphasize offensive rebounding, so it may be very natural for them to prioritize floor balance, and they end up finding that that's enough to kind of
we don't get used to it because we see it all the time, but it is very unconventional the way Michigan State plays in some right. I mean, and
usually.
So right,
there's
and
only,
so
there's only one other. There's only one other
North
school in the
Carolina,
country
right?
that does it. Yeah,
yeah, and so it's kind of like facing the triple option. You don't think of it because you watch Michigan State all the time, but it is really a weird sort of way of playing.
Here's what it does. And we talk. I talk about this in a very different context sometimes. When Michigan State would face, say, a guy like Tominaga, right, from Nebraska, that guy would take shots in rhythm and from spots that you are just not used to a guy shooting from. And it is very hard to adjust on the fly to that until you see it with some repetition. And then maybe you could start to actually get a feel for this thing that doesn't seem to have a natural feel. I think it's somewhat similar to Michigan State's transition game. You are not used to, as a basketball player, having a shot goes up and you got to be prioritizing, busting your ass to get back down the floor to defend so you don't get beat for an easy one. That is not natural in the way that Michigan State forces you to do it. So, yeah, it's unconventional as hell.
Yeah.
And, you know, that most teams that run are doing so first and foremost as a result of pressure. Like they're using turnovers to try to generate the ability to run. That's nothing Michigan State ever emphasizes is creating turnovers. It comes in a totally different way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, how many fast breaks have we seen after free throw misses? You're like, what?
Yeah.
How do you get it? There should be two guys behind. Right. The two guys are already like at half court. There's no way you should have an advantage running the other way.
That should never, ever happen. And yet it does. Why? Yeah. Because guys are not used to having to bust their ass off a free throw that their team is shooting.
All right. So the fourth key of the game is getting into the paint. So obviously we mentioned that USC tends to be a little bit small, although they've got decent size, like kind of they're all average 6'4" to 6'8", but they don't have really big guys. And so anyway, so they have a little trouble protecting with twos. Michigan State is a very good 2-point shooting team. In fact, if you picked a perfect team for Michigan State to play, you'd prefer a team that does well against the three, but not against the two, since Michigan State's 3-point shooting is not
Yep.
really an important element to their offense.
Yeah, I think that it's important for a couple of reasons. One, we've already talked about. You want to force this team to foul you because they've shown a propensity for doing it, and you have confidence in your free throw shooting. So play downhill, force them to have to guard, force them to have to foul while trying to defend you.
Yep.
That's going to be good. But the other thing is just generally getting the ball into the lane and around and at the rim is likely going to produce good things because USC does not have much in the way of rim protection. And they've just been giving up a lot of success to opponents. And opponents who don't shoot the two don't finish plays as well as Michigan State does. Then
Right.
add in transition too, which end up often as points in the paint, points at the
Mm-hmm.
rim. You know, that's another way that you would think that Michigan State can take advantage of that.
And fifth and final key to the game is the giveaways. USC is not a team that forces a lot of turnovers. They're 200th in steal percentage, although they have 119 in turnover percentage for opponents, but largely that's obviously not steals, and so that's maybe you could say it's caused by pressure with just offensive fouls and screening and stuff. But Michigan State has been, well, they were better last game against Minnesota. They have spurts where they're not so good, and so it's not something they've really cleaned up. I would say I don't feel confident at this point to say that their turnover issues are sort of in the rearview mirror.
No, not yet. Here's the other thing: USC, and I've watched them enough to not know where the hell this came from, but they got it in. Musselman and his staff got it in their heads that it would be advantageous against UCLA to play this weird run and jump thing. And so here's what I mean: possession would get, UCLA would get into the half court, and there'd be a guy closely guarding the ball handler, applying some ball pressure. But after about 5 seconds, somebody else would just sprint toward that ball handler and apply a double team. And you know what? Shockingly, for as effective as that might sound like it would be, it didn't work very well. I don't know what they were doing, why, and they did it several times. It was weird, really weird. I don't know if they're going to try that. Supposedly, the idea was they thought UCLA's guards were vulnerable to committing turnovers. And so that would, Michigan State's had at least occasional problems in that area. You could imagine that they might be thinking about ways they could try to speed Michigan State up, force mistakes, etc. It'll be interesting to me to see if they try that or if they try something else, maybe more conventional trapping, maybe just high ball pressure, man-to-man ball pressure. I don't know. But it is going to be important for Michigan State to value the ball because one way you can allow an inferior opponent to hang around is if you're giving away possessions. And we've seen
Right.
that, that's so I think that's a key. You want to have another relatively clean game.
All right. Well, that does it for as far as the keys to the game. And I just want to remind you, if you've not yet had the opportunity, make sure you go and check out our support page. There's a lot of stuff there that offers not only the three sponsors of the show, the brothers, the Squeegee Squad, and Nudge Printing, but there's some other stuff there too. Get a hold of Mike Garland's book or some salt solution, which can help. Sort of works like Gatorade, except doesn't have all the sugar. So you have offers there, as well as ways to support the show. And pretty soon we're going to be packing up our bags. And I just realized today, I don't know why it hadn't occurred to me before, but I'm, including the Minnesota game, I'm going to 7 straight Michigan State games.
Wow.
Because I actually somehow got talked into with my friend to go to the Illinois game to Champaign. So,
oh,
yeah,
oh,
that's going to be a.
You might want to bring police protection for that one. Those are
my
some angry hicks
yeah
that are going
they
to be in orange. They're going to be filling up that arena.
Yeah, if it doesn't go well for Illinois, that's going to be kind of ugly. My son's driving over from Purdue, so he'll meet us
Oh,
from
yeah.
Indianapolis, and
He ought to
then
wear both schools' colors. We'll see how that goes over. Oh,
oh yeah, so my wife and I will go down and we'll meet him there. So it should be fun to actually see a new arena, and obviously never been there. What's funny is that one game, so the streak will end at Michigan, which theoretically you just go to that game. It's just down the road. It's an easy one to get to. I went to that last year. I just don't have any interest in going that many games in a row because especially going to the Big Ten tournament, it's a lot. So yeah, I was really regretting the Illinois game. Now I feel less now that they're 9-0, I don't feel like as bad going to the Illinois game. I think so, whatever happens, I'm
I
not
think you
quite as
go. I think
worried.
you go in expecting that they're probably going to take the loss for a
Yeah,
variety of reasons,
obviously.
and it kind of feels like a house money game.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, if Michigan State takes care of business up to that point, I mean, they may still have a couple game lead on Illinois, maybe even more. And so I
Oh,
don't
I
know.
mean they're up 4 right now, so I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of things got to go. So Michigan State, of course, is the other. Of course, the thing is, Michigan State's gotten 13 in a row, going for 14 against USC. That will tie the Bobby Knight's record for most Big Ten victories for a head coach. And then UCLA could potentially be the record-breaking game, which would be pretty amazing to do that in Pauley Pavilion of all places. Certainly,
Absolutely.
certainly nothing you would have predicted when Izzo started his career that he his last Big Ten victory to break the record would be at UCLA. I don't think
You
anyone could have
certainly
imagined that.
no, you certainly couldn't have. You're exactly right. But I mean, I think there would be something very fitting about that. Um, obviously the home of John Wooden, where he just created the most dominant team in collegiate basketball history. Um, it's a building where so many of the all-time greats have played as their home court. Um, it would be very fitting. And the fact that this is a good UCLA team. I mean, I don't know that you can still feel a huge degree of confidence yet in what they are, but they've rallied and they're 6-4 now, I
Yeah,
believe.
4 in a row.
Um,
Yeah,
so they've or maybe they're 6-3. I don't
they're
recall,
six. They
but
were 2 and 4. Now they're six and
they're
four.
six and
Yeah.
four. Okay, so
Yep.
I was right. So, they've come back a little bit, and obviously we're going to talk about them more once we're in Los Angeles. We do the preview for that game. But it does feel like they've turned the corner, and so will that will be a hell of a challenge. I mean, to try to get the record that game on that court against that team, that'll be a fight.
Yeah, it'll be exciting, it'll be fun. It'll be just cool to go out there. I haven't been to Los Angeles since I was a kid, so that'll be kind of fun for me. Hopefully, it's a trip without hiccups, so we'll make everything kind of goes as planned. So I'm gonna go pack my bags, I guess, and I'll see you at the airport, which is kind of
Yep.
crazy to think that. So, all right, well, until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go green.